Good evening and welcome everybody who is joining us. I'm going to be giving a presentation this evening on my recent trip to Ghana. So let me go ahead and get my slides pulled up for you here. There we go. All right. So my trip to Ghana was with the Wabash Pastoral Leadership Program. I've been active with the program for 2 years now. December will be our final meeting. There are 14 pastors from all across Indiana from many different denominations, and we gather roughly every other month for a seminar geared toward helping us as pastors understand issues that are at play in Indiana. And one of the ways we have done that has been the study tours that we've gone on. Our study tour last year, you may recall, was to the US Mexico border near Texas or in Texas, where we were definitely studying a lot about immigration, and that was very eye opening. And the plan originally, when I started the program, was to go to Northern Ireland. And the idea was we were going to talk about how in Ireland they are working as a society to teach ways to process and deal with trauma because of all the violence that was going on there. At our March meeting, March of this year, so about 7 months before we were set to go on this trip, our director sat us down in the conference room and she said, "Pastors, our trip to Ireland is off because we're going to Ghana instead." And I said, "Okay." Um, Sub-Saharan Africa was not on my list of places that I was planning to go. So um, they said one of the goals of bringing us to Ghana was absolutely to bring us somewhere we probably wouldn't go on our own, and they absolutely accomplished that. So Ghana is located in West Africa. So here's the continent of Africa, and West Africa is roughly this area over here. And here is Ghana. The coastline runs along the south, along the Atlantic Ocean here. And you can see on this map of the country of Ghana, which I was told is about the same size as Indiana and Kentucky put together, just to give you a sense of scale.
Hmm.
And here are some of the key places that we're going to be talking about. Accra, the capital, down here. Kumasi, which is the next largest city in Ghana. Up here is Tamale, which is the third largest city in Ghana. Mole National Park, Asin Manso, Anomabo, which is one of the places we stayed, and Elmina. So those names and places may not mean a whole lot right now, but they will mean quite a bit more by the time we are done tonight. And so here is most of our venerable crew, looking like we just got off of an 11-hour plane ride, which we did. Those of us who usually wear contacts, we were all outed because no one wore their contacts overnight on the flight. So several of us looked at each other and said, "Oh, I didn't know you wore glasses." And so we had a couple of different kind of Methodists, Disciples of Christ, a couple different kinds of Baptists, Lutherans, Presbyterians. Um, yeah, I think that covers it. So we had people from across the church. Saturday was primarily a trying to get our feet on the ground and kind of get settled kind of day. So we arrived Saturday morning, and Sunday we went to worship at Trinity Baptist Church in Accra, which I think the church actually owns the entire shopping center. It's a shopping center, and the church, to get in, you walk upstairs into one of the buildings. And of course, being a group of pastors from the United States, they ushered us into kind of the office wing where we could get a formal welcome from some of the staff. The sharply dressed gentleman over here is Bright. He was our guide while we were in Ghana. He was the knower of all things and made everything run very smoothly for us. And this gentleman here is one of the pastors at the congregation. He describes himself as a pastor who is a neurosurgeon on the side. So he sees his work as a pastor as his primary calling. And so once we got into the worship space, you can see it was a big worship space. It was a full worship space. And based on my face in the corner here, you can see that stuck out a little bit there. And this was one of the Sundays that they did have communion. I think they're maybe having communion once a month or so, but this was one of the days when they were having communion. So we got the opportunity to have communion on the continent of Africa with God's people gathered for worship in Ghana. And there were also anointing people afterwards. So we came and got communion and were then anointed with oil. The service ran exactly 2 hours. And you can see in the picture of the worship space here, they actually had a timer going in the rear of the worship space. And each choir and each speaker and whoever else had a certain amount of time. So I admired that. They kept things moving along. There were multiple choirs and multiple bands, and all of them were awesome. We definitely spent a good amount of time breaking down the sermon over lunch following the worship service. But it was pretty fantastic to worship on a different continent. And again, despite so many things being so very different, we were still gathered there for word and sacrament. People were still proclaiming Christ crucified and God's good news for us in that. So that was one of the things that struck me was no matter how many things are very different, no matter how many things are very distinct from here, just in terms of the people and the climate and everything else, so many things are really recognizable and very similar. Things were not as weird and different as I was anticipating they would be.
Was everything in the worship service in English?
Yes, yeah. English is very widely spoken. It is one of the. It is the kind of the language of government. Everything that's official is written in English. As with many parts of the world, a huge number of people are bilingual, if not trilingual or more. So almost everybody we came across spoke English, usually in addition to at least one other language. So following worship, we headed over to the Ghana National Museum in Accra. And among some of the things that we saw, the Akan are one of the large ethnic groups in Ghana. And within the Akan, there are several clans, and each clan has its own totem that is a symbol of the clan. And the people who are members of that clan are thought to have characteristics that whichever animal this is kind of describes them a little bit. And so these are some of the staffs that leaders of clans would use when they would gather together. And in some traditions, they have the idea of the talking stick, where when you gather for a council or you gather for a meeting, only the person with the stick can have the floor at that time. So and they have to pass the talking stick on to the next person. And I think there's something to that. We also talked quite a bit about textiles, and we'll see more with different kinds of textiles and weaving and everything as we go. The very first cloth that they have records of in Ghana is bark cloth, made from the bark of trees. And we saw some of that. But then as weaving started to be developed, they started with the very simplest of patterns. And then they progressed into the striped patterns and finally into the more intricate patterns that I think most of us would probably imagine when we think of cloth from Africa. And so the textiles definitely are an important part of the culture. Also in the National Museum, when we look up in the middle, you see these giant spiders. These are cutouts. These are not actual live spiders. So we did see some creepy bugs out there and everything, but The spider is an important character in folklore, and the spider is crafty and wise. And the spider creates the web, and the web is a symbol that is also very important in folklore and in thinking because every part is connected to every other part. And it's this idea that a tear in the web over here is ultimately going to affect over here. So it's this idea of everyone's well being matters because everyone is connected to everyone else. And before I go on, if I could just ask folks, if folks can hit the mute button on their microphones, unless you have a question to ask, then hit unmute and shout it out. But I'm getting some feedback in here, and I hate the way I sound. So from the Ghana National Museum, we went to the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum. Kwame Nkrumah is kind of Ghana's version of George Washington. He was the figure who led the fight for independence from the British. And in 1957, Nkrumah and his group of other leaders declared independence from Britain and were one of the first countries in Africa to do that. And they chose this spot where the black stone pedestal and gold statue are, because this was the site of a British polo ground where black Africans were not allowed. So the British came in, built their buildings and forts and whatever, and said, "Yeah, we know you were living here first, but you can't come in here. This place is too special for you." So this was the spot where they declared independence, and they explained that Nkrumah was pointing forward because he said, we don't believe that we need to go to the left or to the right. We don't feel the need to affiliate with the Western world or the communist bloc. We're only interested in moving forward. One of the things that was important to him about moving forward was the idea of African unity and the idea that many countries had borders that were kind of divvied up according to the designs of colonizing powers, and more unity among people in Africa would lead to greater prosperity, greater political influence, and so on. And that was one of his ideals. About 10 years later, however, Nkrumah was deposed in a coup, and one of his statues, as you can see here, was beheaded and the hand broke off. And Ghana has primarily been a stable democracy in West Africa, but they have not been without their issues as most countries are. The mausoleum is this structure here, and it is built to look like a tree that has been cut down before it can grow all the way, and that is symbolic of his hope for African unity that was not realized yet. And here's his gravesite within the mausoleum there. Monday, we headed to a different part of Accra to the W.E.B. Du Bois Museum. W.E.B. Du Bois was an American author and activist, very active in civil rights. And as an author and a scholar, of course, his books were really important to him. In the early 1960s, he immigrated to Ghana and brought his library with him, so we were able to see his library. And in the burial chamber, a separate building from his home, you can see in the ceiling once again the spider web pattern there. Again, that idea of everything being interconnected, and it was not lost on us that the man's initials spelled out web. So to be able to again see somebody who was important in American history, also a prominent figure in Ghana, was just kind of neat to see that connection there. Monday, or following our trip to the W.E.B. Du Bois Museum, pardon me, we went to the Aya Center, and it is a center that exists in Ghana, and you can see some of the grounds here, very beautiful. And their primary mission or primary purpose is to coordinate study abroad opportunities for students who want to come and study in Ghana. And that is how we got hooked up with them. Usually it's more geared towards undergraduate or graduate students, but they said, well, how about a group of Indiana pastors? And they said, we'll try anything once. So we'll we'll see if they take next year's group of pastors. Um, we heard a lecture on Pan Africanism there, and that lifted up again some of those ideas of on their own, none of the, I believe, it was 54 countries in Africa have a huge amount of economic power, either purchasing power or GDP or bargaining power. But all taken together, Africa is a huge market with rich mineral resources and a lot of purchasing power. So the idea that more unity can allow Africa a greater place on the world stage and the ability to shape events more in line with their interests than has been the case for quite some time. And in the afternoon, we had a session with David Danto. And David is a traditional storyteller and actor from Ghana. And that was the session with him was one of the highlights for me. And he started by talking about the way the kind of traditional way storytelling was done by an elder in the neighborhood or an elder in the village, wherever people are living. He said that his generation was one of seemed to be the last where that was really a common practice. But he said that usually it would start with some music or a song that the storyteller would sing, and there would be a little bit of dialogue between the storyteller and the audience, and then the person would tell the story. When the person was done telling the story, there was some dialogue and there was song to wrap it up. And that reminded me right away of how we read the gospel in church, that we usually will sing an alleluia. There'll be a line of dialogue to introduce. The preacher will read the gospel and then it'll go in reverse. There'll be a line of dialogue and there'll be music. So that point of contact I thought was very interesting. He said that the stories are not necessarily always told with an eye to what is going on in the life of the audience right at the moment, but that over time, the the learning and wisdom of the wider culture, kind of what the group of people has figured out altogether, that when you tell enough stories, people will hold on to those stories, and when something comes up in their life and they need that wisdom, they will be able to draw on it. And again, I saw this parallel to preaching and worship of whatever we hear about in the Bible from week to week may not may not directly speak to what's going on in our lives that week. But if we hold on to it, the moment will come when we will go, you know what? God has something to say about this. God said something about this in Scripture. And another thing he said that really struck me was that one of the marks of a great storyteller is that they are able to leave room for others to keep telling the story. They're able to leave room for others to tell their own story. So things don't necessarily have to be wrapped up nice and neatly at the end of the story, but there's enough open possibility that people can see themselves in it, that people can continue the story, that people can take the story in a new direction. And again, I thought that definitely sounds like preaching, and it actually reminded me a lot of Mark's gospel. And so I started thinking a lot about Mark's gospel and oral composition and all the good classic stuff that I learned back in college. But there was a lot to process there, and I could see see some thoughts on the importance of storytelling when it comes to evangelism. So all of these things are bubbling up here. Um, Hopefully, they will bubble into something good. But the session with David was really fantastic. While we were at the Aya Center, um, one of the people, uh, and I cannot remember who she was connected to, but there was a seamstress who came and she was offering to make clothes for people. I did not get any clothing because I was not sure that I would look quite right in some of the fabrics, but I did ask her to make me these stoles, so a green one and a red one, and this is batik fabric. And in fact, the red one still has a little bit of wax on it. The process of making the fabric, I don't understand really well, but it has to do with you put wax on it in the places you don't want the dye to get on, and then the dye is put on. And so I wore this one on Sunday, and then I think I wore this one on Reformation Sunday. So again, the textiles, and I don't know for a fact. I don't think this is a coffee bean because that's an East African thing, but I'm convinced that's a coffee bean. At least when I wear it, it is. So had some textiles to bring back. Let me pause there. Questions, observations, concerns? So Tuesday, we got up and we went to the Flow Bar School in Accra. And this was one of those places. There were several of these places, but this was one of the places where when we got there and we went inside the gates and we saw the cinder block buildings brightly colored and the big trees everywhere and the palm trees. This was one of those places where I thought, yes, I really do feel like I am in Africa. This looks like something I would see on National Geographic or what have you. And the Flow Bar School was founded by this woman who's back here on the poster. She was a retired teacher and gave her retirement years to building this school. It runs from preschool up through high school, and it is a Christian school. They're not affiliated with a particular church, but it is a Christian school. And one of the connections we had with it was Bright, our guide, who's right here. When he is not leading groups around from the Aya Center, he teaches at the school. And here I am with the principal. And again, because Ghana is an English speaking country, when we stuck our heads into some of the classrooms, a lot of the things that were on the walls reminded me a lot of what I've seen in my own children's classrooms. Just the materials on letters and counting and shapes, all the same stuff. So again, just kind of one of those. The classroom looks extremely different, just based on who's in it and the fact that they've got windows open all the time because it's warm. Um, and yet some things are very much the same. Some things are very much familiar. Um, I did get a kick out of it when we went into the one preschool room, and several of us went in and sat down and were talking with the children. And the one little girl walked up to Libby, our fearless leader, and Libby reached out to pick her up and give her a hug or whatever. And for whatever reason, this little girl was just completely terrified and started screaming and just I I found it highly entertaining. But again, some things are kind of the same all over. So the reason we were at the school, not only did we want to see the school and just get a um, sense of what do some of the schools look like here, but it was also a venue where we were going to meet some of the leaders that we wanted to meet with. So the gentleman over here by the podium is Ebenezer Doku, and he his title is Municipal Chief Executive. the way he described his work, it seemed to me very similar to an alderman in Chicago, in that he has kind of a part of the city of Accra that he's responsible for. And he said he spends most of his time having people from his area come in and bring their concerns to him, so he can see in what way he can offer services or solve problems. He said that what they will often do as a council, as kind of all of his colleagues at that level of government will gather and try to focus on one area of need per year. Not that they would not do projects in another area, but they try to really make a difference in one area each year. So he said it could be infrastructure in terms of roads, or it could be other kinds of transportation. He said one of the big ones recently is making sure that there are clinics in each neighborhood so that people can get access to health care near where they live. And we also met with Francis Xavier uh, Sosu, and he is a member of parliament in Ghana, so equivalent to a congressman in the United States. And he has a fascinating story. He was orphaned as a child and was eventually taken in by a religious community who brought him up and were able to help him get educated. And he eventually graduated from law school and now is a member of parliament. He has some ideas on kind of changes and reforms he would like to see in the Ghanaian government. And he is very much an advocate of African unity. And what he shared with us was, in his view, a lot of nations have been trying to approach it from a political aspect first, saying, what can we do to formally bring our countries together? And he said he would take an economic approach. Can we get a trade union or a customs union going first and move towards a common currency? And when we have that kind of common currency, it allows us to have a greater impact internationally. And once goods are flowing back and forth, maybe then look to political unity. But again, some of the challenges to that are remnants of the colonial powers. And some of you know one of my triggers is people wearing pajama pants like their regular pants. You can now add this to that list. Is people using the phrase divide and conquer when what they mean is split up the work. What divide and conquer really means is what the colonizing powers did in Africa, to turn the people against each other so that it is easier for you to come in and conquer. So many of the borders that have been drawn in Africa were drawn by the British, the French, the Belgians, the Dutch, the Germans, you name it. And part of what helped them draw those borders in those places and exert the kind of power they did was to convince people that those people over there, whoever they are actually their enemies. They may have been enemies at some point in the past. They may have just been people living by each other and trading when they needed to. But overcoming some of those things that have become deeply ingrained with folks is a challenge to building unity. People have been taught for so long, these people are bad. Why on earth would we want to form a country together with them? So it's one of the pieces that they're working on. And I gathered several artifacts that I passed around when we were meeting in person, and took pictures of a few of them here. Uh, Francis Xavier has written several books, and I got a copy of this one, I Am the Street Lawyer, which he said he very purposely called it that to kind of recall the Lincoln Lawyer, the novel by I can't remember who wrote the novel, but Matthew McConaughey was in the movie. And being a former British colony, they do have a lot of the British legal system, including the wearing of robes and wigs. So yeah, Francis is a very dynamic, very charismatic guy. I was glad we had the chance to meet with him. After that, we got to do some shopping. And one of the places we went to was the Accra market. So it's an open air market. This particular part of it was covered, but most of it's open air. And they have a little bit of everything there. The sellers are very passionate and very much come out to try and draw you into the shops. This guy in particular actually followed our director all the way through the market and all the way back to the bus. And you can see him here outside the bus, still trying to make a sale there to one of my colleagues. Um, so yeah, it was a whole other thing. I did buy a nativity set, so I got to engage in some haggling, which is not my favorite pastime, but I did get a nativity set that was carved out of wood and got to do some haggling. So I did buy something at the market. We also stopped at Global Mamas, which is a cooperative run by many artisans and people who actually work the store. And they come together as a co op to ensure that the people who produce the goods and the people who sell the goods get a fair wage and a good cut of the profit of selling these things. So we stopped and bought some things there. Let me pause there. Questions, comments, concerns, insights? Okay. So from Accra on Wednesday, it was a travel day, and we traveled up this road up to Kumasi, which is the second largest city in Ghana. Accra was very much just kind of big city energy. Kumasi had a very different vibe. It was much more relaxed and laid back. Um, yeah, I kind of dug the vibe there a little more than I did in Accra. Accra was just pulsing with big city energy, and Kumasi was a little more chilled out. What I was not as enthralled with was the quality of the roads to get us from Accra to Kumasi. It really made me thankful for our interstate highway system in the United States. Um, Parts of the road were nicely paved and even, and seemingly with no rhyme or reason would just turn into dirt or gravel, or what had once been paved road that had degraded to dirt and gravel. So our 5 hour drive turned into a little over seven. But on the way out of Accra, you climb up from the coast and up the hills, and a lot of the countryside looks like this. It's very green, very lush. Um, and we went through several villages along the way, and it's just a representative shot of what a lot of that looked like. Kind of reddish dirt, lots of cinder block with metal roofs. Again, one of those places where I thought, yep, this is what I had imagined Africa looking like. uh, when we finally got to Kumasi, we went to the Mhenia Palace Museum. So in Kumasi, it's in the Asante region, which is that central area of Ghana. And the Asante are one of the peoples that are part of the Akan people. And this particular palace here was actually built by the British. The king of the Asante people at that time, the British exiled him to somewhere in the Pacific. And when they deemed it convenient, they brought him back and they said, look, we built you this nice palace to replace the one that we, kind of tore down. But the king would not move into the palace until he had raised the money to buy it from them outright, because probably with very good reason, he did not have a whole lot of trust. And so this is now a museum. It is now the Palace Museum and has a lot of artifacts on the Asante kings and kind of Asante royalty. And then the Prempeh II, he was one of the kings. This is the museum that has a lot of the artifacts of the kings. So a lot of various things that they would use in processions and ceremonial stools and that sort of thing. There are still kings that live in Kumasi. The current palace is actually built right next to this one that became the museum. And while the kings do not have official authority as any kind of government operative or anything like that, they have a lot of informal sway with the people in that area. And as the way our guide explained it was, if you're the governor of that region or you're the mayor of a town in that region and you want to get something done, it is really in your best interest to go and talk with the king and kind of get him on your side. So the uh, kind of the more ancient institutions are coexisting with the modern institutions. So the following day, we made our way out to Aramwomase, which is a village outside of Kumasi, still in that Ashanti region. And one of the things this village is known for is the weaving of kente cloth. Kente comes from a word that means beautiful, and um, this particular area they are trying to build up into kind of a destination for people who are visiting Ghana. The first place we went to where we were seeing them weave the cloth was in a warehouse. And then they took us outside and they said this is maybe a little more traditional looking setting. So the folks are under a thatched roof weaving the cloth. And you can see the people kind of sit inside the loom. And uh, weaving is not something I know a ton about. So I'll be referring to many of the parts as the thing that does this. But the thread or the yarn comes in through the back, and depending on how complicated the pattern is, there are several different kind of screens in the middle that you will insert, so that when you pull down on one of them, it'll separate only certain of the threads. So as you pass the shuttle through, it will create the pattern you want. But those things that separate the threads that are running perpendicular to the weaver, what controls those are attached down here, and you actually work that with your feet. So it's kind of like driving a stick shift car. You're using both hands and both feet at the same time uh, to perform this maneuver. And so there's the strings hanging down with knobs on the bottom of the strings, and the people grab those with their toes and pull them back and forth with their feet as they are feeding the shuttle back and forth between them to create the fabric. And all of the kente fabric is woven in strips that are about 5 inches wide. And then if you want to have a bigger piece of fabric, you sew the strips together. And um, each pattern has a name and each pattern has a meaning. So I bought a strip of this pattern. I saw it because I thought the white color would make a great white stole, and thought the colors were beautiful. And they told me the name of this pattern is God's Will. So woven by Asante weavers in Ghana and sewn together by my mom in Shearerville into a stole. So likely you will see this at 8:30 on Sunday and possibly on Christmas. While we were there, they took us around a church building actually that was near where the weaving was going on, and they took us to a grove where they were growing cocoa trees. Ghana is the world's #2 producer of cocoa after the neighboring country of Cote d'Ivoire. Ghana was the leading producer of cocoa until some civil unrest in the 1980s that impacted production, and they've been trying to get back into that #1 spot for quite some time. But cocoa was introduced to Africa in the 1870s. It is originally a New World crop from Mexico, one of Mexico's gifts to the world, along with vanilla and corn, among many other things. And what eventually becomes the delicious, delicious thing we know as chocolate starts as this flower. And like many fruits that grow on trees, the flower eventually turns into the fruit, which is this cocoa bean or cocoa pod here. And when you cut open the cocoa pod, you can see it has all of these white, squishy sections within it. And so the white, squishy sections are then pulled out and processed, and the cocoa nib, the actual part that they process into chocolate, is in the center of these white, squishy things. So I believe that is where they get the cocoa butter from, and then the shells can be turned into charcoal and burned, and that ash is then used to make African black soap. So the cocoa pod gives many things. While we were there, we were invited to take part in a naming ceremony, and part of that was everybody was invited to dress in the uh, kente fabric. So you can see some of my colleagues look a little more at home in that than others, but this fabric is actually, it is way heavier than it looks. The full getup probably weighs 25 pounds. It's really heavy woven fabric. And not only does each pattern have a name and a meaning, but some patterns are actually created for special occasions. Will, our assistant director, actually bought a bolt of cloth that, and they said the pattern is called Barack Obama because some weavers created that in honor of his visit to Ghana. So each pattern kind of has a, in addition to being intricate and beautiful, has meaning. So they took us out to the where the naming ceremony was going to be, and traditionally in this part of Africa, when children are born, they're first given a day name. So depending on whether you're male or female, they have two lists of names, and whatever day you are born is the first name that they give you. So I was born on a Monday, so my day name would either be Kojo or Quadwo, which are variants of the same name. And on the eighth day, so the child is kept inside for a week, and on the eighth day, they are brought to a gathering with family and elders, and it is at that point they receive their given name. So many people have a day name and a given name, and then their last name. And so at the ceremony, they gave each of us a piece of fabric that was woven with our name on it. And so Quadwo is one of the variants of the name for a male born on a Monday. And Isia is, I believe they said it means peace and joy. So um,
Oh.
no, nobody's more joyful than me. So I figure that's great. Don't laugh at that.
No, I think it's great.
No.
I have a question. Did they pick your pattern for you, or after you got your name, or was that something that you each got to go through and pick one out yourself?
Yes, we each got to go through and pick out our own kente fabric that we were going to wear to the ceremony. So I was just kind of drawn to the black, white, and gold. I just thought that looked pretty slick.
They're all beautiful.
Yes. It's a little more understated than what my colleague Ronnie was wearing. I don't know that I could have pulled that off. But no, we got to choose the pattern.
Oh, nice.
And so we received those as a part of the naming ceremony. We made our way back from the village back into the city of Kumasi to a place where they specialize in stamping Adinkra symbols on various things, including textiles. And Adinkra symbols are, it's almost a system of hieroglyphics, but each one of these symbols has a name and has a meaning. So, for example, this one in the center on the pillar, you can see on the guy's shirt. You can see it on some of my colleagues' kente fabric here. That one is a symbol that means God is supreme. And so when it is stamped onto fabric, they take the bark of a particular tree and they burn it. And then the ash that is made from that, they then pound with water into ink. And then the ink is set on a pot over a fire, so it's boiling as they stamp it. And the stamps are made from dried gourds. So I decided to be the guinea pig and be the first to stamp our cohort cloth there that we got. And this was the symbol that I picked. It is I cannot remember off the top of my head what the name of the symbol is, but is meant to look like a ruler or possibly a scale, and it is symbolic of excellence. You know, things are up to standard or up to measurement. And in fact, I noticed this symbol was actually stamped on the back of all of the bottled water we were drinking. I think our guide was shocked at how much water we were drinking because many of us are not accustomed to being in the tropics. But the Ghanaian Department of, I'm not sure, maybe it's the Ghanaian FDA, but whoever certifies that water bottling plants are operating properly, that government department, this is their logo, this is their symbol. So it's the traditional symbol that again is being, still used. So each of my cohort mates came through and stamped, but I was number one. So on the topic of the Adinkra symbols, one of the things I brought back was this print that is hanging in my office. And again, it is the symbol for God is supreme, or supremacy of God. And I thought it was pretty visually stunning. So there it is. You can come anytime and see it in my office. So from Kumasi, on Friday, we made our way south to Asan Manso. Asan Manso means the Slave River, and we wanted to, part of the tour was to go and check out places or visit places that were part of the transatlantic slave trade, because of the impact that the slave trade and everything that has happened since then, it's had a huge impact on life in the United States. So we wanted to investigate it from the eastern terminus of it. So actually, let me go back here. Many of the people who were enslaved as a part of the transatlantic slave trade originally were people who had been captured in wars between different peoples in West Africa. And eventually people in West Africa started going and kidnapping people from other parts of the continent. And many of the people came from this northern area of Ghana and up north of Ghana into what is now Burkina Faso and kind of that Sahel region that is the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. And once people were kidnapped, they were marched south towards the coast where the ships were. And Asan Manso here was the site of West Africa's largest slave market. And the reason it was here was there was a river where they could bathe people before they were put up for sale. It says, welcome to the Ancestral River Park. In the years leading up to 2019, the 400th 400th anniversary of the start of the transatlantic slave trade to the United States, Ghana had done quite a bit of work on developing the sites where many of these things happened. They were anticipating a lot of visitors to come and visit in commemoration of that, and they did start to see more people coming to visit, interested in those sites. And 2019 led into 2020, and nobody was going anywhere for a while. But the way the way our guide told the story was different than what I expected to hear. He certainly told a lot about the the brutality and the suffering that went on in this place, but he also spoke a lot about the importance of places like Asin Monso now as a place of return for people coming from the United States or the Caribbean, people whose at some point whose family or ancestors came through here, but this being a place of return that people can now return of their own free will and connect in that way. There's also the story of resistance, and one of the things they pointed out was this plant here, where you can see some of them. The leaves are kind of wide and normal looking, and if you look closely, you can see right here these leaves look really small and pointy. This plant is actually related to the Venus flytrap, and if the plant is disturbed, say you are marching a bunch of people through the area, people can come by and look at the plant and can tell if people have been through there lately. So there were people who tracked the groups of people who had been kidnapped, and would free people from that. Um, so the story told in Ghana, like I said, was there was more to it than what I was anticipating. Um, and one of the things that I noticed, and with this and one other place that was related to the slave trade, and if other folks have traveled places where bad things in history have happened, maybe you have had this experience as well. But it was really difficult for me to reconcile the beauty of the place with the ugliness of the history. It's a beautiful forested place. Um, when you get down to the river, the bamboo that grows by the river, it almost looks like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. Um, and this over here was the site of the last bath. People were made to bathe, so they looked presentable. And our guide explained that if people were not uh, people were not bought at the market, they were taken into the woods and murdered. He said, "We have no clue how many people's remains are in the forest around this area." He said, "You're in the middle of a massive graveyard here, among other things." But again, the idea of remembrance and return, that transformation, that now the descendants of people who were brought here can return of their own accord. And I had what I can only explain as a Holy Spirit moment, where as soon as we got there, it was just on my heart that I was going to go in the river. My ancestors did not pass through here, um, but I just felt a sense of a need to be in that water. Um, and the water looks kind of brown, but as you can see, the when you get up close, the water is much more clear and cold. May I add, um, surprisingly cold for being in the tropics. But again, it's a beautiful place. It would be a great place just sit and relax and enjoy the beauty of nature, were it not a place that was so horrific in terms of its history. Um, that was I think that site really stuck with me the most, or maybe was the hardest for me to kind of take in and process. Um, we finished making our way down to the coast where our hotel was, and Saturday morning we went to the Kakum National Park down in the southern end of Ghana, and we went there so we could go on the canopy walk. The canopy walk consisted of 15 or 16 of these long bridges between giant trees. I have no clue how high up we were. Alls I know is we were way up there because I looked down and all I could see were the tops of trees. If you didn't know this already, I'll tell you now. Eric and heights don't really go together. But I did have some colleagues who opted not to do this, but I said, you know what? When am I going to have the chance to do this? So, and forgive me if this is not okay to say in 2024, but I said to myself, Eric, you got to man up and get across those bridges. So we made sure to get a picture of our Lutheran contingent, and here's our director, Pastor Libby. Um, we had to send a picture down to the synod office because this was actually the day of Bishop Graham's installation. So, if you were not aware, Bishop Graham was elected Bishop of Indiana Kentucky Synod in June, and his installation was in October. And I guess we got a pass for not being at the installation because we were 11,000 miles away. But just some shots of what it looked like. The bridges did not sway very much side to side, but they definitely moved up and down a lot. And once she got a full grasp on how much I did not really care for heights, Libby thought it would be funny to walk behind me and kind of jump on the bridge just because it was something to do. Um, and so again, just a panorama there of what we were able to see and the beauty of nature out there. And so here's Asan Manso, and the national park is over here. And then we went to Elmina. So Elmina is the name of the town, and it comes from Portuguese for the mine, because there was a lot of mining going on here, particularly of gold. And in 1481, the Portuguese brought most of this building over in pieces from Europe, and it was assembled on site. So it is the first European building built in sub-Saharan Africa. And the Portuguese told the people living in the area at the time that they needed a warehouse and a store place for gold and ivory and spices and all the things that they were trading in, because the ships that would come and take the stuff back to Europe, they weren't coming constantly, so they needed a place to keep it. Yet the foundations of the building were built with giant prison cells or dungeons in them. So it seems that the idea of trafficking in humans was kind of there from the beginning. And so we walked across the bridge and across the moat. And the first place you saw in the castle was the main courtyard. And being from Portugal, they built a Catholic church right here in the center of or right here in the courtyard. As you face the church building, to your back is this structure, and this is where you would walk up to get into the living quarters of the Europeans who lived in the castle. They took us first through this door here and took us to a smaller courtyard, which was the female side of the castle. And this was one of the dungeons where they kept the female prisoners. And one of the, I was going to say one of the more disturbing features, but everything here was disturbing. But one of the particular features of this part of the building was there was a secret staircase directly from the dungeon for the women that led directly up to the governor's apartment, because the governor did not want other people, other European people, seeing what was going on. Um, this staircase is part of the reason why Elmina, still to this day, we were told, has a higher proportion of mixed race people than other parts of Ghana, because the mothers were shipped off to the New World, and the children, being half Portuguese or half Dutch, depending on what century we're in, were allowed to live in town. Back on the other side of the castle or the fort, this was one of the dungeons where male prisoners were kept. And right above where my colleague Ronnie is standing was a shaft where they would drop food down, and whoever got the food would get the food. Through here, down in the corner, they brought people out to the door of no return, because once people went through this door, they were herded onto a ship and taken off to the New World. It was really striking then when we walked up to, this was the governor's apartment. I noticed right away just the quality of the air was different, being up in this apartment. You look out the window and there's the beach. There's palm trees. It's breezy and light. Um, Again, this would be a great place to live were it not also the site of such awful history. And in just another instance of things that I have trouble wrapping my head around. So eventually, the fortress was conquered by the Dutch, who took it from the Portuguese. And the Dutch Reformed would be damned if they were going to worship in a building that had been a Catholic church. They said, no, we need our place of worship to be pure. We're going to build a new chapel. So they built a new chapel directly on top of one of the dungeons where the female enslaved people were kept. So they were concerned about worshiping in a place where the Catholics had been, but were still okay with having enslaved people directly beneath their feet. And it is Psalm 132. Oh, let's see, what is it? Hold on a minute. I believe that is verse 13. For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his habitation. Which again, I'll just stop. And on the way out of the castle, there is this plaque. An everlasting memory of the anguish of our ancestors. May those who died rest in peace. May those who return find their roots. May humanity never again perpetrate such injustice against humanity. We, the living, vow to uphold this. That was our Saturday. Sunday was a travel day, back from Anamabo to Accra, and then we flew from Accra over Lake Volta up to Tamale, and then we drove from Tamale to Mole National Park. This was the view out my room at Mole National Park. And we went on 2 wildlife excursions, over the course of which we saw warthogs. This is a shea tree If any of you have ever had any kind of lotion or cream that uses shea butter, this is where it comes from. We saw baboons, most of whom were hanging out either near the homes of the people who work at the park or just on the roads because it had just rained. And they did not want to be in the tall, wet grass or up in the trees that were all wet. So the baboons were mostly on the ground where we could see them a little better. We got to see elephants. We got to see them fairly up close. I had mentioned in one of my video updates that the one elephant we saw in the morning was not real pleased with our presence and started kind of turning towards us and was kind of stomping over to help us understand this was his area. That was I didn't know elephants could be scary, but elephants can be scary. And we saw a lot of antelope and Monday was our last kind of full day, and we made our way. Tuesday, we flew back to Accra. Tuesday night, I took off for Istanbul, and my colleagues left Wednesday morning for New York. And actually, that flight got delayed, so people ended up needing to spend a night in New York. And for once, the travel snafus actually didn't affect me, and I was very fortunate. I was very thankful. Uh, Let me pause there. Questions?
Yes,
I've got one, Pastor.
I was not wanting to interrupt you when you were, where they were doing the weaving.
Mhm.
Appeared that it was men doing the weaving. Was that the case?
Yes, traditionally, weaving was a man's craft.
Oh,
So yeah, certainly a departure from I think what most of us from a European background would think.
thank you.
I got one, Pastor.
Yes.
What's the countryside like when you were traveling from one place to the other? Is it mostly wild? Is it cultivated? Is it large plantation farms or individual subsistence farms? What's it like out there? I know they have the national park, but is there still sections that are just up for grabs and wild?
I don't think I don't think there's much that is up for grabs. It is I would say probably subsistence farming is probably the best description. We didn't see a ton of we didn't see anything that looked like the Midwest. No farm fields that went on as far as the eye could see. A lot of villages, so and I assume surrounding the villages were farms. But yeah, I would say probably subsistence farming is more of what we saw, and villages. As you get up away from the coast and it's kind of hilly there, it is very green and lush. But then as we got farther north, um, it was drier. Like when we got off the plane in the northern end of the country, we could feel the humidity was gone. So as you go farther north, it does get drier. So the types of crops they can grow and the types of animals they can raise change. But yeah, I would say subsistence farming is probably the uh, description you mentioned that seems to jive most. There's not a lot of the national parks, of course, are protected, but I feel like most of the land has some kind of development, even if it is just developed into subsistence farming.
Did the small villages have electricity or did they look to be totally without it?
I think most of the places had electricity because you drive by and the stores would have refrigerated cases and those sorts of things. Um, and I think I've shared with some folks, I was struck by how normal a lot of things were. Um, it was not like going into the Stone Age. It was not like going into a war zone. Um, you know, The people look different. There are different customs. There is different stuff to eat, but you know, people have running water. People have from where we were. People have a lot of Western style plumbing. Everywhere had electricity. Almost everybody had a smartphone. Um, every TV that we saw was a flat screen. Uh, uh, people have people have access to a lot of the same things we have, maybe just not in the same quantity, I would say. So yeah, a lot of things were very different, and a lot of it just struck me as these are folks getting up, going to work, getting their kids off to school, just trying to get through another day, much like a lot of us. Um, one of the things that I noticed that was different was the emphasis on interaction, and even really basic interactions. People coming into to just a room where people were gathered. Um, People really made a point of talking to each other. People really made a point of greeting each other, and I thought that was very refreshing because I think we are kind of consciously moving towards trying to minimize our interactions with each other. Um, I myself have thought from time to time, can I just order this pizza on their website? That way I don't have to talk to somebody when I call. Um, but I think we might not be better off for that. I think the I just think that the emphasis on actually interacting with people was important, and I think it to an extent kind of humanizes your neighbor. Um, so something I noticed that was different that I thought, maybe we could stand to learn from the Ghanaians on that. Um, I'm sure none of you are surprised to see. Any other questions or anything else that people are kind of wondering about before I do a couple slides worth of food, which I know all of you are shocked that I have slides devoted to food. So I did sample, and many of my colleagues did as well. A lot of the notable dishes that Ghana is known for. One of them is fufu, which is this cassava-based dough that is dropped into soup. There's a lot of soups and stews. This is dark soup. There's also light soup. This one, I believe, was the ground nut or peanut soup with a chunk of goat meat on it. And you reach into the soup with your right hand and tear off a piece of the fufu, kind of dip it in the soup and eat it. Um, we went to, of all things, a Ghanaian Turkish fusion restaurant. So it was lots of different kinds of rice and various types of kebabs and stuff, and that was pretty yummy. I tried the jollof rice, which is this spicy kind of rice pilaf here, served with some fried fish because there's so much coastline, lots of fish available to people. The jollof is one of the national dishes of Ghana. From what I understand, there is beef between Ghana and Nigeria over who makes it better. Not having had the chance to try the Nigerian jollof, I will not weigh in on that. But the soup and the rice and many other things were spicier than I was anticipating. Nothing was so spicy that I couldn't eat it, but there were some things that came close. I did try one of the cocoa seeds, and it just kind of had a kind of generic fruity flavor. Some people said they got some kind of mango notes from it, and then the cocoa seed was very bitter, but ate it fresh right off the tree. Um, Interestingly enough, while some of the people were shopping at the Global Mamas store, some of the people of the female persuasion spent a lot more time shopping, and I noticed that there was a local drinking establishment down the street. So I walked down and got myself a club beer, which is one of Ghana's oldest and best known beers. And you can see that was served in this pretty awesome skull mug. So yeah, we drank a good amount of club beer. This was one of the restaurants we ate at. I just took a picture of the menu there, with light soup, ground nut soup, palm nut, smoked fish. So a lot of soups and stews, and then your choice of protein: goat meat, smoked salmon, fresh salmon, snails and crabs, and grass cutter. And I saw that on the menu, and I was like, "What is grass cutter?" Grass cutter is another name for the great cane rat, which is a giant rat. So I'm glad I looked that up before I ordered it. So I did not try grass cutter, but this is red, which as you can see is red, but it is black-eyed peas cooked in palm oil. And I ordered it with some fish cooked in it. There were fried plantains with almost every meal, which was fantastic because I really like fried plantains. And there were French fries available in a lot of places. And I have to say that Ghanaians take their French fries seriously. Every place that there were French fries, they were hot and crispy and done just right. So whoever is teaching French fry making over there is doing a bang up job. At the beach resort, I drank some coconut water straight from the coconut there. And when we got to the national park, they had some really great things for us to eat. Breakfast was a buffet, but then lunch and dinner, the chef would actually come out. So for lunch, he would come out at breakfast and tell us, what was going to be on the menu, and would take orders. And then at lunch, he would come out, tell us what he was planning to make for dinner, and take orders. And the food was generally very good. On our wildlife excursion, we had some coffee, tea, and rolls out in the middle of the park there, which is pretty cool. And among the interesting things I tried was guinea fowl stew. And guinea fowl are these ugly flightless birds that are a little bit bigger than chickens, and I guess people keep them with their chickens because guinea fowl they said they protect the chickens. So I don't know if they protect them from cats or dogs or coyotes or whatever, but anyhow, I guess there were some guinea fowl that needed protection because they ended up getting served for dinner. So the guinea fowl is underneath this sauce here, and it does taste quite a bit like dark meat chicken, much, much leaner and seemingly a lot bonier. And this was a corn cake, very similar to a polenta, floating on there. The one thing that was not quite as great was the broth or stew that it was floating in. It tasted just kind of generic green vegetable-y taste, but it was the consistency of slime, so it lost a lot of its appeal. So that was our dinner at the national park the last night we were there. And that is what I have for you. Go ahead and close that out. And let me see if I can pull everybody back up there. Ah, there's everybody. Questions, thoughts, insights?
Thank you for this. It was wonderful and very interesting.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, awesome job. Really, really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Glad that it spoke to people. I know sometimes people say, "Oh, I want to share my pictures from my trip," and sometimes you kind of go, but I'm glad that it, at least if it wasn't speaking to people, folks are at least humoring me. So, but yeah, it was a great trip. It was a great opportunity. And like I said, I feel like one of my responsibilities, having been on this trip, is to tell the story and what I saw, to be a witness. And I guess the first thing I would say is, when we see anywhere, Africa is a giant continent with hundreds of different ethnic groups that speak hundreds of different languages. And there's a lot of commonalities. It's like Europe. There's a lot of commonalities among a lot of European people, but the thing I want to make sure I mention is anytime I see anything on Africa in the news, there's a war being fought over something I don't really understand why they're fighting over, or there's some sort of horrific disease outbreak or famine, or somebody has overthrown the government or whatever. And that is true in some places. It is not true everywhere. So just to be able to come back and say, yeah, I went and there was no, the only time at which I felt unsafe was because of the elephant. I felt safe. I felt welcome. And like I said, it's a lot of people going about their lives much the same as we do. So just to make sure that story gets told too. Beautiful place, beautiful culture. Glad I had the chance to go. If I were to go back, I would know which things I would definitely eat again, and which I would say, I tried it, and once is enough.
Pastor Eric, I might say when you spoke about the guinea, there are reasons to have guineas. They make a terrible noise. They just make a horrible screeching. We had them to keep the rattlesnakes away. They would scare the rattlesnakes. And
Okay.
yes, and they were very, very protective. If anybody was coming near the house, they screeched, and you knew somebody was around.
Okay. Well, that is, see, I'm learning something. This is fantastic.
Better than a watchdog.
Good, 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 good.
Pastor,
And to my knowledge, I have never eaten watchdog, but I have eaten guinea fowl.
Pastor, has your trip to Ghana kind of softened your position on jammy pants? Because from the first photos, it seemed like a couple of outfits looked very similar to jammy pants that I've seen worn in the neighborhood. So seeing it is an international phenomenon, you still not embracing it at all?
I think pajama pants are fantastic for wearing at home.
You're not gonna join the bandwagon, are you?
Yes.
If I join that bandwagon, it's going to be a long, long time. And certainly, if you have questions that come up as you're kind of stewing on any of this, reach out. I would be happy to talk about it. But thank you so much for joining me tonight, giving me the opportunity to share what I saw, and hopefully folks found it interesting.
Thank you.
And
It's wonderful.
thank you. And for those who are usually with us in the morning or at other times, we've discovered that praying the Lord's Prayer together on Zoom is not always a winning proposition with the delay and going back and forth. Would someone be willing to pray the Lord's Prayer on behalf of the group?
Well, if you like,
Please do.
our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. We will not be meeting next Wednesday, as it's the day before Thanksgiving. We will be back here studying the following Wednesday, the first Wednesday of December, we're going to do a couple of sessions on the Reformation. So we will be back for that. Thank you for your time tonight, and blessings on your evening.
Thank you,
Thank
Pastor.
you.
Good
Good night,
night.
all.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Right, John boy.